Welcome back to the Metal Exchange. This is Chris here with Justin as always. We have a very special episode lined up for you. Our last episode, we kind of went down memory lane or remedy lane, as we said, and with our good friend Mike and talked about our first experience going to the ProgPower USA festival. And we are pleased to be joined by the festival's promoter of 20 plus years, Mr. Glenn Harveston. Welcome, Glenn. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, gentlemen.
I'm going to pass the baton over to Justin to kind of get into the kind of a little bit of the history of how the festival began before we talk, more extensively about the third ProgPower specifically. But Justin, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I'll echo Chris's sentiments and thank you, Glenn, very much for joining us. We really appreciate it. I guess we'll kind of jump right into the beginning, and I'll ask, for a festival that's been in Atlanta for almost 20 years at this point, what was the inspiration behind having the original show at J.J. Kelly's in Chicago?
It was free. Basically, went to Power Mad for a couple of years and got to be friends with the bands up there. One of the bands at Power Mad was Ion Vane.
Sure.
And Chris Lotesto and I got to be pretty good buds. And so he was one of the ones that went out eating and drinking with us one night. And, push came to shove. And I said, I'd do the fest. And he said, well, I got this bar in Chicago that I'm pretty sure you could do it there for free if you just give him the bar. Hell, I'd never done anything before, so I jumped at it.
Free is always the is always the draw. I guess that obviously took place in early 2001, and it seems like you quickly decided to have the second show later that same year, albeit in Atlanta. What was the inspiration for the move? Obviously close to home, but why Atlanta? Why center stage? And why also did you have it that same year? It seems like it was a lot to put together in 2001.
Well, let me address the first part, why I did it again that same year. And it's bottom line, I was a dumbass is really what it was. I had no idea what I was doing back then. And I sold that show out in Chicago, and I got a taste of, the success of it. It's nice getting those kudos online and making a few bucks. And so I thought, well, shit, that's something I could do again. And Atlanta's far enough away from Chicago that it would be just like a show for Atlanta to draw. So I thought, well, I'll go ahead and start snooping around down there. And as far as center stage, I had a friend down here, Paul Cashman, and he had a friend, his name was Tim, and they kind of had connections at, it was Earthlink Live at the time, and it was one of the few venues in Atlanta that you could technically, an outside promoter could come in and rent. So I didn't have to strike any kind of ticket deals or promotions and all that. It was a straight rental situation. They had no idea who I was. It didn't matter that I sold out a 300-person bar in Chicago. I was still coming in cold in Atlanta. So it was one of the only ways I could get my foot in the door as a legitimate promoter at the time. So that's how. And the other thing was Atlanta. It was such a pain in the ass up in Chicago, running around, collecting all the back line, having no local support other than the crew that were volunteers at the time. It was horrible. So I just said if I was going to do this shit again, it was going to be a lot closer to home.
I think that makes complete sense. And I guess, having familiarity with the area obviously goes a long way in terms of the whole production aspect, kind of the behind the scenes stuff that nobody really is aware of or sees.
Well, it was nice to have a train straight to the hotels and venue. Everything was in walking distance compared to J.J. Kelly's, which, was almost a 45-minute drive. It technically wasn't Chicago. It was Lansing. So by the time you hit traffic, it was about 45 minutes from the airport. And it was in the middle of nowhere with some roach motels around it. That was part of the charm, I guess.
It's I think that obviously everybody, and I speak for the fans when I say that we're happy with the new home. It is a very, very intimate and nice sized venue. As you transitioned into that second edition, and it kind of came together fast as we had talked about, Were you concerned after the 9/11 attacks that it was going to have a dramatic impact on the festival? Obviously, the country was going through
Oh,
so much at that time.
shit, I freaked the fuck out. I mean, it was only like a month or so, 2 months before the actual fest at the time. So, you're struggling in Atlanta. I mean, I'd already sold more tickets than I'd sold in Chicago, but that didn't mean anything when you got a much bigger venue. You got to remember back then there was no social media. We were on Usenet. That was where we were, at the time chatting, IRC, all that stuff. And I'm just a local boy trying to figure this stuff out. I don't have the money to run radio ads and everything out. I'm down at like the Megadeth show, walking the lines outside, handing out flyers myself, a party of one promoting. That's, I was the grassroots effort back then.
Sounds like something on the Sunset Strip back in like
You had to do that
1988.
kind of stuff. But then 9/11 hit, and the biggest, I had Vandenplas booked for that show, and they canceled out on me, and ticket sales just nosedived. I mean, it became a local show because nobody would get on a plane after that to come down, and so it was rough. It was rough.
I mean, one of my biggest regrets is not going to see Arc and Balance of Power at that second edition. When the lineup came out for ProgPower 3, though, it was just like a perfect confluence of events for me to get down there. Had you decided at the second one that you were going to give it one more shot, or how did the genesis of the third edition come about?
Yeah, I was in big ass debt after the second one. I lost a lot of money, and the goal was to make a few dollars, get back to even or as close as I could, and then quit. That was it. So, and then I kind of switched up a little bit of how I did things. As you can see, the first two were, it was prog and power, but the more emphasis was on the prog at the time because in the internet communities as they were real small back then, prog was our emphasis. Now, everybody liked power, but it just wasn't our community. With the first show, it was more geared towards the online, and that's where I drew. I drew the people from everywhere who wanted to see the bands, but it was everybody I'd known online forever. But when you moved down to Atlanta, I thought I could do the same thing and just draw more people, and that failed. I sold about 55% of tickets, so I can't say failed too much, but I had set the budget kind of high just because you have to do that kind of thing to draw people in when trying to prove yourself. So I had actually spoken to Guardian and a couple. Back then, all the managers knew each other over in Germany. I mean, Ed Guy and Gamma Ray were on the same roster and things like that. So I kind of had to prove myself at ProgPower 2, and I shot video and sent it and all that stuff. And so, and it just the timing was right. Guardian and everybody wanted to come over, do some shows, and I was their foot into the States, so to speak. So I ran it more towards the power side this time, and it worked because
And I was going to ask you, and I think this is like really one of the key questions for us. How does the roster actually come together? Because when you look back, obviously it's, a who's who in the genres at this time. Was it one band that was like the first domino to fall?
Yes.
Or was it?
Absolutely was. Blind Guardian was the main one because once I signed Blind Guardian first, then I could go to Gamma Ray's manager and say, hey, I got Blind Guardian. And they're like, oh, you do? I'm like, yeah, so why don't you come on board? And then once they're on board, Ed Guy, I've got Blind Guardian and Gamma Ray. Let's make something special in the States. First show, all the big boys. Yep. So, and then they just kind of followed pace as far as the power guys. Now, the prog bands, it was still the same thing. It was just whoever I wanted to pick and choose back then. Who was popular, who did I like, who was cheap.
Were there any bands that you had really wanted to get that you were not able to, or was this pretty much the lineup that you wanted?
On ProgPower 3 specifically?
Right.
Yeah, I went after Opeth back in the day before they blew up, and their manager was very interested, and then I don't remember exactly what their excuse was, but they pulled out before I even went public with it, so Opeth is who I missed out.
Were there any other bands that had either committed or that you were talking to, and that because of just scheduling, you knew that you kind of had them in your back pocket for 4 or 5 or for future editions?
Nightwish, they were. I didn't actually go after them for 3. I just kind of asked questions and who the manager was and all that good stuff. And so, once you start bringing in the big names and proving yourself, then you can take the next step up. And Nightwish at the time back then was blowing up, one of the biggest bands in the world with Tarja. So that was it. After that, it was just every year just figuring it out as I went.
How were the ticket sales once the roster was announced? Because I remember once we found out what the full roster was, we all spoke to each other and we were like, yeah, hell yeah, we're going to this. So I would imagine that the tickets sold pretty quickly. And my recollection is that the festival was sold out that year.
It sold out in 2 weeks.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So that kind of changed my whole perspective on things. It took a lot of stress off of me because I knew I was going to make all the money back that I had lost. And then it kind of led into, hey, you got something going here. You could keep going if you wanted to.
Did you know at that point that you would do a 4th one, or were you going to wait until the festival actually took place and see how everything went before you made that call?
The idea was to do 3 and quit, make my money back. But I sat down afterwards and reevaluated some things and was able to thought, what the hell, let's keep going. I had the bug.
With blind,
it was certainly a successful. Especially for us, we were, young. We were still not even able to legally get a drink at the bar, but we knew we had to be there. And I'm sure that was the feeling for a lot of people that may have, I'm not even sure if I was even aware of the first 2 festivals. But this one, I remember there being a buzz about it even before the roster was announced that something big was coming down the pike, and it certainly delivered. So, go ahead, Justin.
Oh, I was going to say, with Blind Guardian kind of being the linchpin, some of the bands speak for themselves just because of the name value and, your Ed Guys and your Angras. I'm specifically curious about Devin Townsend, though, because he was kind of your first oddball before it was the in thing to call it an oddball. Were you a big strapping young lad fan, or what was it that kind of drew you to Devin? Because he was certainly an outlier.
Ocean Machine. Totally.
There you go.
You heard that album, and it was like, where can I see this live? And then I look it up, research it. Oh, he's never played it before. He's never played out before. Well, if he's never played out before, maybe he'll be pretty cheap.
Well, that was, like I said, that was definitely a trip. I had just become a fan of his, and I wasn't looking forward to him as much as some of the other artists, but the curiosity was there just because I knew the history and stuff, and he delivered in the way that only he can. Although it's funny because he's got a podcast and he still kind of shits on that particular thing because he was saying we were ill prepared for the festival because we had never played, and obviously it's a well-oiled machine now, but it was some growing pains back in 2002.
Well, I think everybody looks back with nostalgia, and Devin's personality on stage. That was the first time we got to see his nipples and him sing Bryan Adams, and so he covered up a lot of technical fuck-ups on his part.
100% about that. And so I guess let me ask it this way: when the roster is finally put together and you have your 10 bands, were you confident that it was going to be a success, or did you still have those nerves based on the travel and everything else?
I was nervous just based on how ProgPower 2 went.
Sure.
I thought if I did this again, then I had to make my money back that I had lost back in 2. It was a significant amount, and so I was nervous.
Would you can you talk a little bit, I guess, about how the venue has obviously changed over the years? Because one of our memories that we always talk about is kind of walking through the hallways just outside the venue and just being packed with all the vendors that were selling CDs, which obviously going back 20 years, you're talking about everyone's online to buy CDs, and that's obviously changed a lot over the years. And you kind of started using more of this nice venue that you have.
Well, number one, I didn't know what the hell I was doing down there the first few years at all. I just kind of made it up as I went. So you got to remember when we had ProgPower 2, I didn't have any money, so all the, like you said, the hallways were used. But with only about 55% capacity, it never got that crowded. Okay? So you guys got to understand, I rent the venue at Center Stage. That does not include Vinyls, which is the other room. That costs money, more money. Well, guess what I didn't have? That's right. I didn't have more money for
Right.
So you were going right back in the hallways without any care how crowded it was, because I didn't have any other options at the time. And then once the venue saw how incredibly packed it was and what was going on and what I was doing and how unique the merchandise situation was, then they sat down with me and we worked out a contract for future years to move it into vinyl and alleviate some of the problems.
We kind of had this memory that we spoke of in the previous episode about this. We weren't exactly sure what it was going on in the downstairs of the Artmore, but we kind of just walked in on this. I don't know if it was like a press junket or something was going on. I remember members of Gamma Ray and Angra specifically were sitting at tables, and we just kind of wandered in on it. And I don't know that we were really supposed to be there, but I was curious, like, what was going on down there.
It had nothing to do with me. If I recall correctly, Mark Groman, who ran the Brave Words and Bloody Knuckles festival up in Cleveland around that same time, and he was a big writer for them. And he was very supportive back then. He still is to this day. It's just, unfortunately, that magazine is no longer in print like it used to be as far as a big selling thing. But he offered his assistance, and he wanted to know if press some kind of press conference like they do at the European festivals, if I wanted to have some of that for publicity. And since it was all the band's first time, I was like, you can do whatever the hell you want. I'll run with it. I didn't even go to it. I was too busy trying to figure out stuff down at Center Stage. So yeah, I mean, I don't even know what happened down there. So I'm glad you guys got in and had a good time anyway.
I was going to say, maybe that's how we got in, because you weren't there and we just kind of pretended like we owned the place, which was exactly what we did. At the time, before, when you're a couple of months out, I guess at this point, it's the summertime. Were visas as difficult to come by 20 years ago? Because you would think on the heels of 9/11, it would be very hard to get these bands into the country for the first time without that, background to kind of lean on to say, these are touring bands that are coming here for the first time.
It actually wasn't that next year, because you apply for them so far in advance, the government takes forever to do anything, and that includes changing the visa process. So it wasn't for almost a couple of years that when things changed, and it started getting really more difficult to get things in. But back then, visas weren't, they weren't that big a deal to get. Honestly, they weren't. You could just, basically you wrote a check and here comes the visas. And then I don't remember what year it was the year that Matos got canned. That was when shit went south for us. And as a DIY type of festival, we don't get the latest and greatest updates that some of the immigration lawyers do. So we just had to roll with the punches. But
it was that was a shock to all of us, and just because obviously Matos was on the bucket list for I can speak for just about everyone, yourself included, I'm sure.
Yeah, my biggest regret was that year when I lost like 5 bands due to visas, because we continued to do the visas how we had normally done it every year until then. I mean, we didn't change nothing. And then all of a sudden, bam, no, you didn't do your visas right. Well, we didn't know. When did you change this? Well, you can't ask them questions. They just reject it and send you a letter. And they give you a letter that's like 15, 20 pages long about shit that you need to include, and your jaw drops trying to just read through this stuff. That's why lawyers do it. But back then, we couldn't afford to expedite after it gets nailed. So, so it was out with the old. But back to ProgPower 3, visas were not a big deal then. I didn't even think twice about them. I just wrote checks.
Ironically, that year, I think it was ProgPower 10 was the year I decided to start attending the fest again after not going since ProgPower 3. So if you want to blame me for all of your visa issues since then,
And nothing has changed in the last 12 years, so I guess it really is you.
You do suck for missing all those years.
I remember seeing that lineup and thinking to myself like, oh man, Matos and Power Quest, which was one of my favorite bands, and Royal Hunt and Fate's Warning. I was like, all right, I think this is it. This is the year I'm going to come back, and I ended up going anyway, and I had so much fun. I remember saying to Justin, I will never miss ProgPower again, and I haven't. So that was. It's kind of funny that we brought that up, but getting back to the third ProgPower, as the festival's promoter, we know nowadays it's hard for you to really be able to get to really sit down and watch the performances. At least at ProgPower 3, how much did you actually get to see?
Honestly, quite a bit. At least of the upper half of the roster. I mean, so I turned my phone off. I had to deal with a lot of shit when I turned it back on. People weren't happy, but I turned it off so I could watch Guardian, so I could watch Ed Guy.
Did you have a favorite set
that year? Oh, Ed Guy.
I figured that, but I had to ask just to get it on the record.
Yeah, the fuck part with Tobias, and he was such a great guy. They were all fun They were just as fun backstage as they were on stage that year. They were so incredibly happy to be there. Ed Guy destroyed everybody that year.
I don't disagree with that at all. I'll just say that it's funny because when you look back, these are all U.S. debuts, and if you look at the entire top half of that roster, everyone would wind up doing headlining tours in the years that followed. And I think that was really a testament to the strength of the roster. I mean, literally the top 5 bands would all do, and in certain cases, multiple headlining tours of the States.
Just at the right time, I guess.
Yeah, it was really like that lineup was like a perfect storm.
It was.
I mean, even on the prog end, even though there was a lot of power metal heavy hitters, I mean, to have Threshold and Devin and Pain of Salvation, I mean, it wasn't like the prog side wasn't well represented either.
No, it was just all the star power on the power side. Really, you couldn't help but notice that. So, but I just did what I had to do, and it worked out.
So once you reevaluate, I guess it was sometime, like you said, after the fest that you said, you know what, we're going to come back for a round 4?
Mm-hmm. Took, I don't know, a couple of months, I guess, of sitting down. I can't remember exactly how long, but I know it wasn't like right after the festival. I had to sit down and figure things out.
And I guess I'll kind of putting a bow on things. What are some of the biggest changes that have happened, other than, of course, the visas, going back? Because, like you said, this was, or I'll say it, this was kind of a really like a landmark festival for a lot of these bands and just the genres in general. What have you seen as the biggest changes since ProgPower 3?
I don't have to chase bands. They are more than happy to hear from me when I contact them with interest. I don't have to bullshit with the managers. I don't have to listen to pompous ass agents from Europe. So that's the big nice thing. My reputation was established, and people were excited to come to the States because like you said, this was before everybody was touring, and we were the doorway to touring over here. So that was the biggest thing. And then we've bumped up the number of bands and bumped up the number of nights and pretty much just maxed out what we can do there comfortably.
I was thinking of doing something a little different, I thought this might be kind of fun. Instead of doing like a word association, I'll give you one of the 10 bands, and you give us just a quick memory or anecdote, or just something that you think of when you hear that band's name from ProgPower 3. How does that sound?
Yeah, well, whatever you want to do.
All right, cool. We'll start with the two U.S. bands, 0 Hour and Reading Zero.
Reading Zero was my stage manager. So he got his foot in the door very easily that way. And I'm very thankful because I could not have started this festival without Chris Roy and Joel and the rest of the guys in Reading Zero. They were all volunteers for the first couple of years. So back then, the opening slots were more about giving the unknowns a shot. 0 Hour had performed at ProgPower 1. They deserved it based on the Towers of Avarice and all that good stuff. And you got to remember, I have to work within my budget. So both of those fit the budget.
Silent Force.
It was all about DC. I had actually asked him about Royal Hunt, but back then, I believe that was about the time that he was not on good terms with the keyboardist. So he pushed, and he had just really started pushing Silent Force, and that's what he wanted. So I thought, well, what the hell?
Fortunately, we got to make good on that a number of years later. Both obviously Royal Hunt coming over the first time, and then again with DC. So I think everything was made whole with that.
Everything comes around eventually.
Threshold.
Mac was a character. He had that big old voice. He was funny, and he had that big old head to go with it. We were upstairs at the bar. We have a VIP and band bar only upstairs, and he's in there, and one of the guests would come up to him and said, "I thought you were an incredible singer," and he replied, "I know," and that was it. And he walked off. That was the whole conversation. I mean, he had a dry sense of humor, but he was something else.
They've had a run of characters fronting that band. I don't need to get into the whole Damian Wilson drama from when they played, but it's for a band that's had such a phenomenal career. It's amazing that they've had so many so many good singers, and Glenn, who obviously was on stage just a couple of years ago, was no exception. He was just a phenomenal frontman.
Yeah, all great guys too.
Let's go to, I guess, I mean, we mentioned Devin. Do you have anything else you want to mention about Devin Townsend?
No, I think that was it. I didn't expect what he was on stage. He was a comedian more than he was a singer back then, and it worked out beautifully. I had no idea he was going to open up with Bryan Adams.
Definitely definitely a performer for sure.
I guess the next band I was going to mention is Ed Guy, which we talked quite a bit about. I also agree that was, for all the things I was looking forward to, and Ed Guy was definitely one of them. That ended up being my favorite set as well. I just thought the way that Tobias got the entire building just on their feet, and it was something else. So if you have any other thoughts about Ed Guy.
No, it was just easy to bring them back as a headliner a couple of years later. They jumped at it.
How about Gamma Ray?
I closed the curtain on Kai Hansen.
Yeah.
That was, Saturday night was something else. They were running really far over. I mean, they blew past their set. And most of the time in Europe, they just pull the power on you. But I was like, okay, this is Gamma Ray. This is their debut, and my stage manager at the time had signaled their stage manager, hey, that's it. You're done after this song. And somehow Kai took that as keep going. And so, there was a lot of heat going on backstage. Anger was not exactly pleased about it at the time. I was catching a lot of shit. And so, and then that Gamma Ray kept going. So, finally I was like, this is the last song, and they're playing I Want Out, his iconic song. And as the chorus is going on at the end, I'm like, shut it, we got to go. And so I'm closing the curtain while he's singing I Want Out. And I'm like, well, you're out. And so I went upstairs. I was pissed after that set. And their manager came up and explained everything to me. And Kai came up and apologized. And that was it. We drank beers and laugh about it now, but back then it was quite the tense moment.
Wouldn't be the last time you'd have to close the curtain on a band either.
I've had to do it a couple of times. Usually not so much now, though, because they know I'll do it. I'm not bluffing.
Pretty Maids comes to mind, but we'll carry on. How about Pain of Salvation?
The set list was phenomenal. It was just sucked that there went on at the end. I hated that for them, and it wasn't by choice.
Having to follow Blind Guardian's U.S. debut is not an enviable position for anyone.
No, Guardian made that choice.
Guardian. Oh yeah, no, I'm aware of that. It's just interesting that Pain of Salvation has to follow one of the greatest, if not the greatest, power metal band of all time, depending on who you ask, and it was just an unenviable position. And unfortunately, listen, they put on a phenomenal set, but it was. It's you're following Blind Guardian.
Hell, half the crowd left with Guardian.
Yeah.
And that's because the snobby-ass power metal fans just want to get things that, wasn't exactly like Pain of Salvation was Dream Theater and had crossover appeal. They were a true eclectic prog back then, and Daniel was quite outspoken on various issues, so he hadn't made too many friends. Shit happens. We move on.
I don't remember if we had mentioned it in the previous episode, but for those who don't know, my memory serves. Blind Guardian had an early flight the next day, so they asked to be bumped down one slot and switch places with Pain of Salvation. That's why Pain of Salvation closed out the first night. That's correct?
Correct.
Okay. And I guess, I guess we'll just go right into Blind Guardian then, since we're talking about them.
Intimidation, fanboy, and jet lag. Because I was intimidated as hell by them because they were the biggest band back then, and I was also a tremendous fanboy. And Hansi turned out to be he's the greatest guy on the planet. Even to this day, I still sit down and talk with him, and he's still gracious about everything. So I love Hansi. But their performance sucked. Everybody was jazzed because it was their actual first show, and so that's why everybody was excited. But if you look back on the video, and I have the videos in my private, they were jet lagged to hell. There was no energy on stage. They sang the songs and left. It was like Sonata Arctica before Sonata Arctica.
Yeah, it's funny. I've seen them live probably at this point almost a half dozen times, and I have to say that every time I've seen them when they're on tour, it's like mind-blowingly good. And that set, for the reasons you just stated, it was just kind of flat, and it was kind of ironic because as much as I like the band, it was really the adrenaline of seeing them for the first time that carried you through the set, because every other performance was stellar compared to that one.
Yeah, Hansi admitted afterwards that they were totally drained. They had came in like the day before, and I don't even know how, but like I said, they were flat. They knew it, but they were still happy to be here, and I'm still happy to have them. And then they came back the next time and killed it.
Yeah, that was going to be actually the next thing I said was, did you feel, I don't know if vindicated would be the right word, but when they did come back and did Imaginations, that was one of my personal favorite sets that I've seen at ProgPower in the 10 plus festivals that I've been to. So I'm glad you mentioned that because they really did kill it on there. Yeah. Quite a bit of time had passed between their first and second ProgPower appearances.
Not easy.
So I guess, I'm sorry?
Not easy to bring a band like that back.
Right. We were so excited to hear that they were coming back. So that was awesome. That was a hell of a night. I just remember the crowd was just like really. They were like people moshing. It was like they were really into it. I was kind of standing up right around where I guess whoever was filming it, and I was kind of watching it from there, like from like a safe distance, and the crowd was just so amped and jazzed up about it. Like that was a blast. So anyway, getting back to the topic at hand, one band left, and that would be Angra.
There was quite the language barrier back then, They were nice guys. They did speak broken English. So they spoke, not that it was the technical issues, but just personality wise. They come from a different culture. So it was kind of a unique as far as how we got along and their expectations. And obviously, the gamma ray incident didn't help foster relations that night with them. My crew could tell you some stories that I won't that's, about my time with them. But I will say this now, they are like probably one of my closest bunch of friends in terms of a band. That when they come back, we hug. I mean, it really is a total different situation now compared to back then. Nerves, they didn't know what to expect. They thought I was going to pull the power on them when they went past their time limit. They had this full 90-minute set planned out, and they thought they were only going to get to play, 60 minutes. And because that's the way they do it everywhere else. Your time's done, you're over with. And I was like, no, I rented this place. You can play as long as you damn well want. So they were okay after that.
Did any of the bands, after everything was over, kind of give you an indication of how they felt about their first time performing in front of like American fans? Were they surprised? Were they and also, I guess, kind of a connected but separate question. Were the bands kind of surprised at kind of the way that the fans interacted with them outside of the venue? Because I mean, there were times we ran into people at the Artmore and out eating, and everybody that we ran into was just super nice and very gracious. And I was curious if they had said anything to you about how it felt playing in the States and the American fans.
Well,
and just things in that area.
What you just described was what helped me make my reputation, because they had not experienced that anywhere else in the world. If they would have tried something like that down in South America, they would have just been overran. And in Europe would probably be in places would have been the same. They just had never had the opportunity to interact in a laid back setting that was intimate, but it was ran in a professional manner. And I did get quite several compliments that people were coming over and that they were actually scared before they even got to Atlanta, because they knew all the horror stories from U.S. touring back in the day. I think, I hate to say this, but John Schaefer actually helped me out quite a bit in terms of calming everybody down and letting everybody know that I was a professional and I kept my word. And he was actually on site, and he really helped me. And it's unfortunate that the incidents that I can't. People just look at him like he's a total asshole now. Don't get me wrong, I'm not a fan of what he did either. But back then, he actually helped me out.
Yeah, I remember, and I won't go into too much detail here, but I remember meeting him at that fest, and I was impressed by the interaction back in 2002, and I'll just leave it there.
Yeah, it was a different world back then.
It was a very different world, and I'll say it, and maybe it's a testament to all the things that you brought up. Not only obviously your reputation, but I think that what we would be hearing from bands at ProgPower 4 and the years beyond is that there was a buzz in Europe about this festival after ProgPower 3. And I think that may be the biggest compliment we can give the fest, is that there was literally a groundswell of bands. Bands like Thunderstone come to mind that would later play the festival, that when they came, they said, we knew about this festival because of ProgPower 3 and just the professional manner in which the whole thing was run.
So I appreciate that. Yeah, the bands that come told me that really the way it is playing ProgPower USA is basically a rite of passage now for bands overseas. It's not the biggest place, and it's not going to get you the publicity and notoriety like it did in the early days, but it's a rite of passage because we've been around for so long. They grew up hearing stories about it and seeing the rosters, and I gotta say, we've had some great rosters with special events over the years, and So the magic just kind of transferred over to there, and then we've been able to keep it going for all these years, and see if we got a couple more in us.
Well, we definitely appreciate the time and kind of taking this trip down memory lane with us. Is there anything that you want to just kind of either say or plug before we let you go?
Fingers crossed. We're in June of next year. I'm not sold out. We still have some tickets left from all the refunds that we had to do over the first couple of years, I guess, so to speak. So pay attention to social media and the website around January, February for news. Until then, we're in the same waiting pattern as everybody else to see what's going to happen.
Well, we look forward to seeing it in whatever incarnation June brings, and we obviously wish you the best of luck, because I'm sure that this has been a headache on you just as much as it's been on everyone else. And when it comes to promoting this, I simply can't. I can't express the agita that you must be going through every single day when you open up a newspaper.
Yeah, I quit opening them.
Yeah, there you go. It's probably better that way. Thank you so much for joining us, Glenn. We'll
Thanks,
chat soon.
gentlemen. I really
Thanks,
appreciate
Glenn.
it.
Be well.
Thanks.